Hi, everyone. It's 5:30, so we'll go ahead and get this started. I'm Carter. A lot of you know me. I'm a member of AGS Council this year. I'm a senior at Duke. And this evening, we're going to have a chat with 4 AGS and Duke alumni. We're going to go over some career advice, a little bit of background, and then we'll open it up to some audience questions. So I'm going to lead this off by letting all of our panel members introduce themselves, and then we'll go through it. We'll go through some questions, we'll go through a little bit of background, and then we'll get to the audience. So Amy, do you want to start us off and then kick it to someone else?
Yes, absolutely. Hi, everyone. My name is Amy Kramer. I graduated from Duke in 2018 with degrees in public policy and political science, and I am currently an inaugural McCain Fellow at the Department of Defense, working this year directly at our U.S. Army headquarters. And without further ado, I guess I'll pass it to Pi.
Hey everyone, thanks so much for having us today. I'm Praveen. I graduated from Duke in 2016. I'm currently a 1L at the University of Virginia. And I guess in the intervening times and then intervening 5 years, I worked both in politics and in policy roles while in DC. And then I'll kick it to Isa.
Hi everyone, I'm Iza. I graduated Duke in 2017, and I currently work as a senior project manager for ECS doing AI development for the USDI. Before this, I was working at a media company that just got me to DC, and I've also graduated Georgetown Security Studies program in December.
Hey everyone, I'm wrapping up here. My name is Pat Thompson. I'm a 2011 Duke grad, public policy. I'm currently the National Security Advisor for Senator Wicker of Mississippi, and I'm entirely bummed that Duke basketball has come to a horrible end this season.
Terrible timing on this. Unfortunate. I appreciate y'all going through and introducing yourselves. I think we have kind of a mix of people in the audience here. We have a lot of people who are involved with the AGS program in various capacities, both on council and coming to various events, as well as in our general body. We also have people more broadly from the Duke community. So I was wondering if the 4 of you could go through and give us all a little bit of background on your time at Duke. I know several of you mentioned your majors, your graduation years. But if you could talk a little bit more about what you did here at Duke and your involvement with AGS in your time on campus. And again, maybe this time, Pi, if you want to start us off.
Yeah, sure. And apologies, I neglected to mention my major. So I was political science. I minored in Arabic, and I had a certificate in philosophy, politics, and economics. While I was at Duke, I got more involved with AGS actually my junior and senior year. And that included also taking both Professor Fever's kind of traditional AGS class, and then I also took civil military relations. Outside of AGS, I was president of the Duke Political Union, which some of you might be aware of is kind of like a nonpartisan, bipartisan civic engagement organization. I was also involved with kind of Seniors for Duke, which is I guess now is just the senior class gift, and that's carried on into my involvement with the annual fund now as an alumni. I think DPU, let's see, I had Seniors for Duke. I was also involved in the American Enterprise Institute's campus involvements at Duke and other universities across the nation. So through that was able to kind of draw in some AEI and AGS programming in addition to getting some of our students to meet their counterparts across the nation.
Yeah, Pat, if you want to follow up.
Sure. Actually, so my AGS involvement was very limited, unfortunately, at Duke. I recently reconnected with Dr. Fever and told him it was one of my biggest regrets. But I attended a few events, but honestly, I didn't even take a class with Dr. Fever. My involvement when I was at Duke, 2 major things for me. One was I was involved in Army ROTC, and I commissioned as a second lieutenant in the Army Reserve after I graduated from Duke. And the other one was I was a manager for the Duke men's basketball team. So I did that for 4 years and got a championship ring out of it in 2010. So pretty good deal.
Yeah, Amy, if you want to go.
Hey, I'll follow up. Actually, I also did Army ROTC, so that dovetails nicely. In addition to ROTC and AGS, I was one of those folks who minored in Peter Fever, so a little different than Pat. I took many of his classes, and it was a significant part of my involvement at Duke. But outside of the traditional foreign policy and ROTC realm, I was also the principal bassoonist in the Duke Orchestra and loved having music as a part of my time at Duke. I was also involved in several women's leadership groups, from the Penny Pilgrim George Women's Leadership Initiative to I was also a member of BO, Business Oriented Women, and so different things in that realm I was also involved in.
So it's my turn. I, like Pat, was not that involved in AGS. I took Peter Fever's AGS class and also the ethics and IR, but otherwise my involvement, I waitressed on the side. So my involvement with Duke was relatively limited, I think, compared to our other panelists. I did P Wild, but otherwise no professional organizations at Duke. And I double majored in political science and Russian, and I minored in psychology.
Yeah, I appreciate you all going through. I think one of the things that we've talked about a bunch this year is that kind of involvement with AGS takes a lot of forms. And I think that all of your experiences, that really comes through. And we hope that everybody gets a lot out of this, regardless of your level of involvement, and that you're able to stick with the program and stay involved even after you're past Duke, like our panelists here. Next, I want to do, kind of before we get into the heavy career stuff, a couple of things. First, I want to do a little bit of an icebreaker and let you all talk a little bit more about your path to where you are now. So, and this can be a little bit more conversational if anybody wants to jump in. But so aside from any involvement with AGS at Duke, I'm curious whether there are other campus involvements that have stuck with you in your professional lives after you graduated. And if you want to talk a little bit about the path that led you to where you are now and explain a little bit about what your day-to-day is like at all of your current positions, since we really have a range here. Yeah, so whoever wants to kick us off is welcome to.
I'll jump in and we'll try to make this abbreviated. I feel like that's 8 questions in one. Path, graduating in 2011, reserve in the Army. I stuck around with basketball for 3 years. I worked at Booz Allen for a year. I deployed to Afghanistan. I came back, and then I, through a Duke connection, started on the House side for a Republican member from Virginia. Stayed there for 3 years, and then jumped here to Senator Wicker's office, and have been here for the past 2 years. Things that have stuck with me, basketball has been the biggest one. I can't tell you how many times I get to weave that in somewhere. Someone has a connection to it. One short story is a chief of staff for a U.S. senator actually on my hall was the Blue Devil at Duke. He was the mascot, and we just reconnected over that. Didn't know each other, was here, and we had traveled to games together and stuff. So just kind of a small world. Another manager for the basketball team with me is now the Senate floor director. We were classmates when we were 18 years old. So just kind of crazy stuff that sticks with you, and never doubt where a Duke connection can take you.
I could jump in next. Actually, an internship I had after junior year in the summer, I think had profound influence on my path after graduation. I was a Schwartzman Scholar in class of 2019. So immediately after graduation, I moved to China. That sort of delayed my real life for a little bit. And I can definitely talk about that experience and how that fellowship in particular set me on a unique path. But upon returning home, it actually was an internship I had through Duke at U.S. Army Cadet Command, basically ROTC headquarters at Fort Knox. I helped them write a diversity strategy in 2017. I ran a lot of regressions and analysis, evaluated the impact of leadership gender on ROTC performance outcomes, just did a lot of research for them, which was a really life-changing developmental experience. And it was because of that role and those connections that I made just as a random, Duke cadet and that internship that ultimately, I think, facilitated my selection as a McCain Fellow and ultimate return to Army headquarters, which is very funny. Some of my internship bosses, when I was a college student, I now report to me working in the Pentagon. So that was one enormous full circle. But again, I can echo basketball. Most people in my office are UNC fans, but it's amazing how many friends you can make just following games and having a stake in them. And everyone in my office is more than twice my age, but doesn't matter. We all watch the same basketball games.
I can go next. So I think part of the path that I followed to get where I am today was driven in part by the roles that I had within, or the involvement that I had with AGS and with the American Enterprise Institute, like I mentioned, that helped me juice a lot of my connections when I was looking for internships and jobs in my junior and senior year. And that gave me the chance to initially be involved on the political side of things. When I came to DC, I worked at political action committees in the run up to the 2018 midterm elections. And, it was all about, I kind of echo what Amy and Pat said about just, whether it's Duke connections or just making connections writ large. Almost every single job I've gotten, I mean, certainly it's great to have that Duke kind of like caliber on your resume, but then at the end of the day, it's who oftentimes that gets you the jobs. So had those political roles up until 2018. And then soon after that joined the administration as an appointee of the Department of Labor, again, through connections, and was very fortunate to work there in the policy office and help work on some of the priorities that we had back in 2019 and 2020.
My turn. So I'll explain my path first. So I graduated in May 2017. And shortly thereafter, I got a job at Bulletin Intelligence, which is just a media briefing company with the purpose of getting to DC and then figuring out what I wanted to do afterwards. Within a year, I'd applied to Georgetown. And so I was working at Bulletin and studying grad school at SSP in Georgetown. And halfway through, I switched to my job currently, which is working with USDI through a private contractor. And I guess the funny thing about Duke, it was actually, I asked my boss one time at Bulletin why he chose me for the job. And he said, not only was there Duke, but by waitressing on the side and by doing other experiences, he could tell that I would be able to manage a lot of expectations in a short amount of time. So I wouldn't be afraid to leverage that in the future, if I were you.
Yeah, I appreciate you all going through that. Now that we've gotten through a little bit of the background, and it's all fascinating, I think I have a couple of kind of more general questions that I'm going to ask. And again, I mean, in a normal year, we'd be able to sit around a table and have a conversation about it. But even now, it can be more conversational, jump in, et cetera. So the first one that I have on that front is about the job search. It's an unusual time for it now, but a lot of the same stuff applies. So on a very practical level, I'm curious how all four of you started your job searches as college students. Do you remember how early you started? Do you remember the kinds of options that you considered? Just could you tell us a little bit about how you navigated having to balance still taking classes with also looking for a job at the same time?
I can start off with some not too nice comments about myself, I guess. So I decided in September of my senior year that I was going to try consulting. And any one of you who has decided to go down that path realizes you have to start networking like a year before then. So of course I didn't get any jobs, but that at least got me, kickstarted into getting my resume all together, cover letters, et cetera. And so that really helped me later down the line when I was applying to jobs, rapid fire. Every time I saw something come up, I would have a template already put together and just be able to edit. And so the things that really helped me was having templates for, all right, this is a more political job, this is a more business related job, and being able to switch it around and really, you know, choose the aspects of everything you've done that most apply to whatever job you're doing. And so I thought the sooner you start, the better. I started at the beginning of my senior year, like I said, and I probably should have started earlier. And a lot of the jobs, especially if you decide to do private sector, will come up earlier in the year. So I'd just be wary of that. Otherwise, how I ended up getting my actual job, I went to an event in DC called MetroLink that our career center was advertising. And I met my boss there, and it just ended up working out. So you never know what opportunities you're going to get.
I can kind of jump onto what Isa said about attending an event in DC that helped her get her job. I think the primary thing for me going through the job search, you know, I knew that I wanted to be in DC, and it wasn't really going to be a private sector search. So it started later on in the year. And what was really important, I was, you know, to the extent that you all are able, I was certainly able. I had taken more credits earlier on in my Duke career, so I was able to take a lighter load my spring semester. And that gave me the chance to, you know, drive up to DC every so often for a weekend, you know, have informational coffees or catch up with friends who would tell me about opportunities that were available or that they'd heard about, or meet with people that that were recommended to me by others. And I think that this really helped me not only for my first job, which was, you know, working in politics through a fellowship, a 2-year fellowship that I was able to get, but just building those contacts for looking for jobs later on. Because I think, as we might discuss later on in the panel, especially DC related jobs can be, there's a lot of turnover, and for good reason, because you kind of want to take what opportunities come your way, and you don't necessarily want to be stuck at the same job for 4 or 5 years. Doesn't really seem the DC way. So certainly I would recommend, whether it's DC or elsewhere, trying to get up there, especially your senior year, and have those meetings and those contacts.
And not to restate everything that's already been said, but just to foot stomp a few things. I had a master resume. So I know everyone tells you it needs to be 1 page and 1 page only, but you could have a master resume that's 2 or 3 pages with literally everything you've ever done. And from that master resume, you already have all of the wording right, the articulation of all of your successes and awards, and you can pull from that into custom resumes that you don't have to build from scratch every time you apply for a job, because you already have a master resume. And so that's a great thing to just have as like a bank. And then if you're applying to a political job, you can pull all the more political jobs versus maybe a government role versus a consulting role. And so that just helped me, not having to think about how to phrase something new and starting from a blank page and having to build a custom resume from scratch every time. I also think consulting interview prep is helpful no matter what you're interviewing for. I mean, the basic techniques of framing an answer up front, knowing how to qualify things, how to support things, how to integrate personal experiences to underscore a perspective that you have in solving a problem. Even if the cases are very unique, I found that I actually learned a lot going through the consulting interview prep and never actually working for a consulting firm. So maybe just download a few or watch a few casing videos just to learn how to frame answers. I think that helped me be successful in from my Schwartzman interview to my McCain interview, just how to articulate concisely and frame answers. So that might help some people. And then finally, the informational coffees are huge. Of course, when I found out about Schwartzman probably in December of my senior year, so I didn't have to look for a job the rest of college, but when I returned from China, I had a job I really didn't like. It was a pretty toxic environment, and I was looking for the next role. And so that was almost a full-time job, looking for my second job. And so that's really what I reference when people ask me how to go about a job search. I maybe didn't have classes, but I did have a full-time job. And I found it most helpful to never turn down a single conversation. And at the end of every conversation, asking for 3 more connections. It's crazy how in DC people do remember you. I got a call for a job a few months ago after an informational interview that didn't lead to a job 11 months ago. It's just when people and their companies change and they have demand, if you're following up every 6 months, saying, I know we had a great conversation, there was nothing available. I just want to update you on all the great things I'm doing and learning, and maybe we can reconnect in the future. Sometimes they contact you without you even needing to follow up, but in DC, it's really important. People do remember you. They remember how you made them feel. They remember if they were inspired by their conversations. And so even if you're not having an ask, you're not making an ask, asking for a job, never turn down a conversation.
Yeah, totally agree. I won't belabor the point. Amy said exactly what I wanted to say in an even better way. I'll just add that, utilize your Duke connections and alumni network. Even if you don't know the person, everyone's willing to help. And the worst thing that can happen is someone doesn't return an email or just says no, they don't have time, and that's not a big deal. But 9 times out of 10, someone's going to be willing to talk to you and give you advice and help you figure out what you want to do. I see Victoria is on here. I've had conversations with her, and she's done a great job of following up with me on different things. So just don't be afraid to reach out, especially to Duke people. Certainly anybody. Thanks for the thumbs up. Appreciate it. Certainly to anybody, but like definitely Duke alumni. Just reach out and just ask.
And be confident repinging folks. Like sometimes they just miss your email. That doesn't mean they don't want to talk to you. It's okay. When somebody repings me, I thank them for reminding me, and I feel bad that I missed their email. So definitely that you're not pestering them. It's respectful. You're entitled. Just be confident and do that.
Yeah, great advice. I think y'all covered a lot of bases there, and I appreciate reinforcing the points that you made. Kind of in these general categories of questions, to follow up on that, I know a couple of you actually touched on this there, but if you have a little bit more to say on it, I'm curious. So I imagine some people on this call probably know exactly what they want to do after graduation. Some people may be set on going to law school, things like that. But I imagine we also have a lot of people here who can relate to not being quite sure where they want to go with their career, or not being sure whether there is one career that they want to go into. So since you've all kind of done a range of things in your careers, I'm curious whether you have advice for people who are struggling with figuring out exactly what they want to do, whether there's one career that's right for them, whether it's going to hem them in if they start something right out of school. Just if you have advice on that, on the kind of figuring out what you want to do from.
I have a quick anecdote. So I had always known, I was one of those people who knew what they wanted to do. I'd studied foreign policy. I lived in China. I did ROTC. I worked for the Army. Everyone expected me to go into national security. But ironically, my year in China abroad opened my eyes to so many domestic issues, from education to infrastructure to the environment, things that we code as domestic, that I actually recognize as fundamental to national security that I had never studied before. And I had this quarter life crisis, I suppose, figuring out, well, I set myself on this trajectory for national security, but what if I want to do education policy? What if I want to help work on climate change, or I don't know. And when I came back home, I struggled for a few weeks trying to figure out, like, I didn't even know what type of job I wanted anymore. And I decided to just accept a gig at a think tank just to move to DC as I spoke to more people to figure it out. And I found it actually pretty difficult, since my entire resume and research and time abroad kind of makes me really qualified for one type of job, that I found it difficult breaking into other fields. And so I decided, well, okay, let me accept this government job and let me focus on all of the transferable skills that I can then bring to if I wanted to pivot in the future. Now, it turns out I love my job right now. So I'm no longer looking to pivot, but if I were, and my advice to anyone who's unsure is to think about the types of things you want to learn. And you'd actually be surprised. I'm sure if Pi and I sat down, a lot of our jobs are probably very similar, even though they're on opposite ends of the government. And it's those transferable skills, the ability to write, the ability to speak, the ability to synthesize information, to seek mentorship from senior leaders. And I'm sure the other esteemed panelists can come up with 100 more better transferable skills, but that's what I would focus on. You can learn a ton in any job. And sometimes, like the first job I had after I came back from grad school, it was horrible. You learn a lot from those experiences too, and you can always leave if it's bad. So I would just look at it all as a learning experience, and you can absolutely pivot. I think people our age do it more and more often, faster and faster, and it's just kind of expected.
Yeah, to jump off that point, when I was graduating Duke, I had two priorities, and in order, they were to pay my rent and to work in defense. And I did not know what that meant. I did not know which area of defense. I applied to agencies, got rejected by agencies, applied to think tanks, got rejected by think tanks. And so I decided to pursue goal number one and went up to DC with the job that would cover the rent. And it was only doing that job, which I actually did have some government clients, that I started to realize that I actually lacked some of the networking that I could have done in Duke, because a lot of the AGS opportunities that I could have done, I was doing other things, and which is part of the reason why I went to grad school. And from grad school, I got a job, and we can go into this later for whoever cares, with a contractor doing things that I've never worked in AI. I did not know what a machine learning was. And from there, now I'm again reassessing my career. And now I'm finally at the old age of 25, figuring out what do I want to be when I grow up, and making the list and talking to people and doing that process. But the important thing to note is that, I'm every step you take, you just get closer to a goal. You don't have to have something set and like, I want to be the department, like a DASD, all right, if you want, like me, I wanted to work in defense, and I'm slowly learning what that means. So I wouldn't put too much pressure. You have time to meander. Just try to make it like an actual step forward to something, and you can figure it out as you go.
Yeah, I can't echo what Isa said enough, right? A lot of people, especially coming to DC, they think that, there's a set path that I need to follow to get where I want to be by age, 35, 40. I'm pretty sure that I think my fellow panelists will agree that especially what you do in your early 20s does not close you off from any opportunities that you might later get down the line, right? It's all those skills that you're learning. Ensure it's something that you're passionate about. Don't just take a job for the sake of taking a job, but things will fall into place. You'll get where you need to go. You can switch jobs as, not too much, but as needed, right? As those new opportunities come to you. And there's no telling, there's no limitation, I think, on a role that you can get when you're like 27, 28, based on what you did straight out of college. No one's going to say, oh, why did you work at this think tank? Or like, why did you work on education policy? And like, why are you now interested in XYZ policy? I think usually people in DC, if you show an aptitude for learning, if you have a positive attitude, they'll want to hire you. So, take what you're interested in, and if you take your initiative and you go out and meet people and you go out and do work, things will fall into your lap. And then the second thing that I'll also say for those who are interested in going to law school is highly, highly recommend getting some work experience before going to law school. I'm very happy with the job that I will be taking this summer, and I'm very sure that a large part of it was just based on what I talked about in my interview about those skills that Amy talked about. I was able to talk about a managerial role that I had at DOL, about entry-level roles that I had, and I think really that was a difference between me and someone else getting that job. So.
I agree with everything you said. The one thing I'll add, I really liked what Pi said about you pursuing what you're passionate about. I think everybody says that, but it's true. An example I'll use is I graduated in 2011. Our student government president at the time was offered to do a bunch of different things, including the typical Duke routes of consulting and iBanking and whatever. But he was passionate about trains. And so he went to work for a train company and is doing really well and has gone on since then. But the point is, he had all kinds of other options that people say to go do, but he pursued something that he just, since a kid, he wanted to go and do. So that's the first thing. The second and last thing I'll say is, don't only look at what you want to do, look at who you want to work for. And so who are the people at those jobs that you will surround yourself with that you can learn from? If you're just going to something with people that, really honestly aren't good people or don't do their job well or whatever, then you're not going to be doing the things, you're not going to be learning as much. I've been really fortunate to have some really good mentors. I know we're going to talk about that later. People that you can surround yourself with, that you're like, wow, like that's someone I'd want to emulate. They have skills that I really like, and you can just learn almost through osmosis at some point. So be passionate about what you want to do, and then find somewhere that there are really good people. Like in that whole process, I know it's like you have pressure to get a job, but also know that you have a lot of value too. So while they're interviewing you, you kind of want to interview them too and see if you actually want to work for them. And sometimes rejecting a job is just as good as accepting a good job. So I'll leave it there.
To kind of not to push back, but to offer also a flip side of it. There's also a certain point of realism where you aren't going to get your dream job coming out of college. No one does. And you know, there is something to be said about people's where they are and their priorities in life. And so there are just certain points. Some of you may be able to live with your parents right after graduation. Some of you may not. Some of you may need a job immediately after. Some of you may not. And so those are just considerations to put in place. Like sometimes you do have to take what you get just to get to closer to where you want to be, and just know that it's temporary, and know that with every job you take, you have a lot of skills you can learn there. So the first job I had was a client relations role. I got yelled at by corporations like Pepsi, and they were very mean to me. And that experience, while it had nothing to do with defense, got me my job, because it's project management, and I can talk to vendors and I can talk to the government and not break a sweat when they yell at me. And so you'll be surprised at what you learn, and don't limit yourself to, you know, just your ideal roles and your ideal jobs as you just get out of college.
Yeah, I really appreciate all that. And since a couple of you touched on this, I think Amy, you definitely mentioned it, and I think Pat too. So a growing focus in AGS and also elsewhere at Duke is on mentorship, which is a big part of why it's so helpful for us to all hear from you. I'm curious whether you could tell me a little bit about the role that mentors have played in each of your careers, whether it's giving you advice, making you feel comfortable, and also any advice about seeking out the kinds of mentors that are going to play positive roles for people getting out of college.
At least for me, I've been really fortunate. A lot of it's been organic. But I think a lot of good relationships turn into mentor-mentee relationships because you continually engage and cultivate it. I think of all of the different leadership mentorship philosophies, I think the idea of a board of advisors has been the most realistic in my experience, although it's probably different for everybody. But I have lots of different mentors that I leverage for different things. Some are Duke professors, some are Duke administrators, some are peers. Having peer mentors is really important. People that you trust, who have your best interest in mind, and who are smarter than you, that you can bounce ideas off of, and in ethical dilemmas and job questions. So having a peer or two or three on your board of advisors, and then people at work in your industry, in your company, who know your really unique situation, but maybe don't have a personal stake in it. Sometimes bosses have an interest that's not aligned with your own, and that can cloud advice. So that's why I like the idea of a board, because you have a diversity of perspectives that you can leverage for different things at different times. And so something I did in this job, I asked my boss, who's a pretty senior dude in the Army, and I asked him, I said, okay, well, I wasn't allowed to commission because I had too many foot surgeries in college, and I'm about to start a career in the Department of Defense with no military service. I'm a little concerned about that. Can you connect me to people at and around your level who have civilian leaders who don't have military service? And also I'm interested in female leaders. Who can you connect me to anyone you know? And he was a great mentor, and he connected me to a bunch of his colleagues and even people above him. And I probably had 15 conversations. It started with 3 that he connected me with, and then they gave me their 3, and it grew from there. And let's say those 15 conversations, one is probably going to lead to my next job after my fellowship ends, and 2 more I've continually engaged just to ask questions, who they know the Pentagon, but they're not in my immediate office, and just life questions and job questions and the different things I'm weighing. But not all 15 led to that. So it's who who resonates with you, who understands you, who you feel comfortable with. Comfort is big, and who you trust, because not everyone's incentives are aligned. And so those are the relationships you continue to cultivate. And I'm not one of those people that sends out yearly newsletters to like 1,000 people blind copied, but there are key people on my board of advisors that like I will put in my calendar every 6 months to just send them a message like, hey, I trust that you're healthy, you're doing well. I just got a new job. I'm super excited. Mind you be free in the next month to talk about it. That's it. And now that relationship is good for another half year. And the right mentors, are ones that it can be 6, 12, 18 months, and you have a conversation and immediately you pick up right where you left off. That's how you know it's a relationship to keep cultivating.
I can talk a little bit about some of the mentors that I've had. And this kind of goes a little bit to what Pat was mentioning earlier about never, fearing to reach out to, especially Duke alum, but really anyone, they may not respond, but they might. And so this goes to what they've done for Duke students that come after them. And what I tell you about my mentors, I would highly encourage you as you're growing in your career to pay that forward. One of my very first mentors, it was at a law firm that I was interning at the summer after my junior year. And he had graduated Duke, some years before that, was on partner track at this law firm. And he would, every time that I had a project with him, sometimes this involved going to the Hill and lobbying, legislative staffers on certain issues. He would, run the first couple of meetings himself. He would, kind of show me the ropes, show me how it was done. And then for the last couple of meetings, he would say, all right, Pai's going to lead this meeting. I was a rising senior in college, right? And this, this Duke grad has that much confidence in me and wants me to succeed and wants me to do well. And so, puts me on the spot and gives me that opportunity. And what I'll say too is you better be ready to take that opportunity and run. Like, don't embarrass the people that give you those chances. But that's a very important thing that mentors like him have done for me. And that's continued on. When I was working at DOL, having, higher ups let me present at meetings at the Office of the Secretary, right? And again, like you have to be prepared. Like you can't go into a meeting with the Secretary of Labor and not know what you're talking about. But that's really, really important for them to trust in you. And that shows that they think that you can do great work, make them proud. And if you make them proud, like they will continue to give you bigger and better, bites at the apple. And that's really how you distinguish yourself. So, even when you're young and in your early to mid 20s, I'm sure that that's a chance that you'll be able to give to someone who's interning for you. And, to the extent that you're able, I would certainly encourage that you take people up on that and then also pay it forward.
Yeah, I think making personal connections especially works, and knowing who to trust and who not to. So for example, my first boss, we got along extremely well, and even though he wasn't in my field, his wife she worked for the FBI, and so he understood that I was never going to stay at that company forever. And I actually told him more than a month in advance that I was looking for a job to leave, and he helped me. He helped me when I was getting my offer letters for my next job. He helped me when I was writing back a counter offer. Because he recognized that he was in a mentor role instead of as a boss who was trying to keep me in a specific place. That's not always advised. I'm sure people have had bad bosses before, but knowing that, having that relationship and knowing who you can trust can really help. And even just like help there's a lot of things that, like I said, the counter offer for my next job, it was so helpful to have someone who had done that before to, have the correct wording. And then I got this current job, not a Duke professor, but a Georgetown professor, who a previous student of hers had reached out to her and said, listen, I need someone who's, quote, professionally aggressive. And she was like, Iza. And so, just making sure that you keep in contact with the people who know the industry and make personal relationships with them, take them out for a coffee or when you're older, a beer. And, just keeping that in is really important.
I'll add that I think you can have, I think Amy said this, different levels of mentors. So like, I certainly have mentors that are like important people that I'm not going to reach out to all the time. They've got stuff going on, but every once in a while in my life, I've reached out for like a big ask, like, hey, here's what I need. Like, can you help me out? And then it's like a heavy lift. And then I have mentors that are kind of like friends or a little bit older that I can text, like I have that level of relationship with, where I'm like, hey, I got this situation. Can you help me out? Or can you connect me with someone? So I think having levels of folks certainly helps in mentorship. And I would just say and encourage everyone here that there's going to be a time where, in 10 years from now, you're going to be on the panel too, and you're going to be sharing advice. And so like mentorship goes both ways is what I'm trying to say. And just always be willing to help out younger folks and make those connections too, even in your roles now. I mean, I'm sure there's younger folks in AGS or whatever that you can help out too. So never doubt the power of mentorship.
Yeah, I appreciate you all being willing to talk about that. I know it's something that we've emphasized a lot, and it's something that it's kind of hard to get advice on a lot of the time because it's so specific person to person. I apologize to everyone in the audience. We're going to run just a couple minutes over on this part of the event. But I have a couple of kind of specific questions, just a question for each of you because you all have very different experiences. So I'm just going to quickly go through those. Iza, I have a question if you're willing to chat for a minute. So I know you mentioned that you went to Walsh at Georgetown for grad school. And I know that's always a big name that comes up for people interested in national security, foreign policy. So I'm curious if you could talk a little bit about your decision to go to grad school and whether you have any advice for current undergrads who are trying to figure out whether they want to go straight to grad school, whether they want to work a little bit, where it fits in.
Right. So I'll start off by saying that grad school helped me a lot more than Duke did. And it's not Duke, it was me. I didn't use all the opportunities I could have at Duke. And so which put me in a position where I needed to really bolster my resume to do something else. So the timeline from the start is I actually was decided that I was going to try to join the Navy as an intel officer. And this is back spring of 2018, and went through took the exams, everything was set. And then I developed some health problems and could no longer do that, and made a decision right then and there that I did not want to continue on the path that I was at with my company. But grad school costs money. And so I found that Georgetown's SSP, so it's not the MSFS program, which is the main one. This is the security studies specific program, has all night classes. And so I worked, I turned around, did my GRE 6 weeks later and applied to Georgetown, and thankfully got in and did 2 years of grad school while working at the same time. And so the decision for me was I needed to use that as a pivot point. I needed something to bolster my resume, and I also needed some more network connections and just get more knowledge about the industry. And grad school is very different than, as I'm sure Pi can attest to, it's very different than undergrad. It's a lot more focused on a specific area. And so that was really why I did that. It was something that I needed to do. And it did get me so halfway through, a professor was who got me my job, which got me a job that put me in for a TSSCI, which is pretty rare, and not entirely rare, but it's a little bit harder to do from the get-go in DC, which is really lucky. So in your question of when to go, I would highly, highly recommend getting work experience. Like Pi said earlier, the people I graduated with just now from Georgetown 2020 in a pandemic, the ones who didn't have work experience are having a lot harder time getting a job now because they only have academic experience. And great, you have a master's, but can you write an email? And so there's something to be said a lot about these like corporate or government little skills like writing good emails, setting up meetings, things like that people expect you to know at a certain age that you may not if you go straight to grad school and don't have any work experience.
Yeah, since you talked a little bit about that side of the grad school coin, and Pi, if you want to talk a little bit about your choice to go to law school and whether kind of the same advice in terms of work experience, et cetera, would apply there.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm sorry, I stepped away for just a couple seconds, so I apologize if I repeat anything that Isa said. So my decision to go to law school, I mean, I always kind of thought that I wanted to go to law school, but this was kind of further confirmed for me in both the policy and politics roles that I had in DC, especially in the policy role working at a federal agency. All the people that I worked with were lawyers essentially, had a legal background. Like they were the ones who vetted every single regulation that went out the door. They were the final arbiters on, what was good to go and what wasn't good to go. And, I somewhat felt limited in the impact that I was able to have without being able to do some of that legal work at DOL. And in a way, this was also true in politics when we would research certain candidates and run an ad on a candidate. And at the end of the day, like we weren't really the ones drafting the ads or whatnot. It was the lawyers who said, here's what you can and can't do. Always came down to the lawyers. And I ultimately wanted to have that position where I was the ultimate arbiter on what goes out the door. So that I was glad to get the experience that I had here in DC, but that definitely influenced my decision to go to law school. And in terms of, and I think this holds true for law school and any other graduate program, and looking for jobs coming out of that, the first and foremost thing that these employers want to know is just that you understand what the expectations of a job look like, right? And especially in this day and age, like it's generally not a 9-to-5 job. Like you are on call all the time. Like you have to handle finicky clients or finicky boss. Like you need to be on pretty much all the time. And employers want to know that you've had experience doing that and you understand what it means to be a professional and an adult. So having that work experience and having employers who can vouch for you when you're looking for jobs coming out of grad school makes a huge difference. This is someone that we can depend on, and this is someone that we want to promote into leadership at our organization, that we want to be the face of our organization. So that's kind of, I think, what I have to say on that.
Yeah, I appreciate it. So I just have two quick last questions, one for Pat and one for Amy, and then we'll open it up for questions. So Amy, you talked about this some earlier, but you're currently with the Department of Defense on a fellowship, which is a little bit different from a lot of other paths. I'm curious whether you could tell us a little bit about your experience with the world of fellowships in DC and how that's different from maybe the traditional job market and job search.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, if you take one thing away from anything I'm about to say, it's if you have an opportunity to enter the government through a fellowship, I would take it. And it gives you, in terms of hiring preferences, easier access into certain government agencies that are otherwise prohibitive. DoD is probably the best example of that, just because of veterans hiring preferences and other things. It's pretty hard to get a job. And so fellowships are the best way in. And then the second thing that makes fellowships pretty remarkable is that it depends on the fellowship, but very often they put you, you're coded as a certain special employee, and that usually lands you in more senior offices than would otherwise be available to you at your age with your experience. I mean, certainly my pay grade is mandated by the NDAA, but I am working in an office with, again, everyone's double my age. No one at my pay grade has ever worked in this office before, but I'm doing all the work. And that has given me access to incredible things, learning so much. And if I were to apply to a job through USA Jobs and start from the bottom, it probably would take me 5 to 8 years to even have a chance at the office that I'm currently working in. And this is just the beginning. So fellowships, whether it's the McCain for DoD, Boren, the State Department has 1,000. Boren's probably the most used. That sends you abroad, then you have a service requirement back, and that can be applied elsewhere, not just at state. The Presidential Management Fellowship is probably the biggest. It's run through OPM. Then you're detailed to a ton of government agencies. One of my best friends from Schwartzman worked at the CDC and is now just transferred to state through PMF. The one thing to keep in mind, though, is almost every single one of these fellowships requires graduate school. And so it doesn't have to be a terminal degree, like a JD or an MPP or a PhD, but it can be a one-year master's. Like I earned a one-year master's in a foreign country, but they do require a master's degree, which is usually a job requirement of certain federal pay grades. And so there's one last thing to mention about the conversation on grad school. If you're interested in government work, so I'm not talking about the private sector. This is also true to some extent in the private sector, but especially for government, if you're looking at different federal pay grades and job requirements, having a graduate degree and no work experience doesn't qualify you for the higher jobs. So you're sort of stuck in this limbo state where you have the educational qualification for a GS 11 or 10, 11, 12, but the work experience qualification for a 6, 7, or 8. And that puts you in a really awkward spot for where to launch your career, because once you start on the federal pay grade, that's like where you are. And so that's just yet another reason to get some work experience first before earning a master's degree, if you're not going through a fellowship or some other path that generally circumvents it. Fellowships usually have holistic hiring practices. Like for McCain, I had to write a series of essays, a couple interviews. PMF is less holistic because so many people apply, but it's outside of the normal USA Jobs hiring process. And so if it's an opportunity for you post grad school, absolutely, and you're interested in working for the government, absolutely, just look at every government agency you dream of and what their fellowship options are. It's the best pathway in.
Yeah, I appreciate the thoroughness on that. So very last one to bring us home. Pat, I'm curious whether you could tell us, so you're on the policy side of a Senate office. The Hill, kind of notoriously the world of informational interviews for people trying to get hired. I'm curious if you could tell us a little bit about any advice you have for people looking for, especially policy positions on the Hill during the pandemic, kind of opportunities for coffee, a little bit hard to come by right now, hard to get up to DC for a weekend. So I'm just curious about your sense of what it's like right now, and if you have tips for people trying to break in.
Sure. Yeah, in-person coffees are difficult to come by, but you can certainly do virtual or a phone call. And I know everyone's getting burnt out by that. And even this, it's like, yeah, got it. This is our 10 million Zoom of the year. But I will say they're still effective. And I mentioned earlier that Victoria, and I think she had the run, but has done a great job of that. I was on a panel earlier and she reached out. We've had phone calls, and I've already introduced her to a couple offices, and I'll use her as an example of, it's not only being connected with somebody like one of the four of us or anyone else, it's also that you need to know kind of a direction you want to go and how we can help you. And she's done a really good job of that, of saying, hey, I want to be in this realm. I want to work for these kinds of members. Do you know anyone that you can introduce me to in these offices? And that's an easy one, like we're happy to do that. So certainly if it's on the Hill, or I'm sure other areas, just be specific as to what you want to do. But on the Hill, if that's a route, my email's in the chat here. Feel free to reach out, even if it's not. Look, I'm a Republican on the Senate side in defense. If you're a Democrat that wants to work in the House on healthcare, I'm still happy to help you and point you in the right direction. So feel free to reach out, really.
All right, I appreciate it. That's the end of our discussion portion. I really appreciate all of our panelists being here and being willing to answer my questions. I think we got a lot of really good advice from that. I know it's a Friday afternoon, people are busy, but if anybody in the audience has questions, we do have a Q&A time scheduled for a Q&A now. You're welcome to raise your hand. We'll unmute you, and yeah, you can address questions either in general or to specific members of our panel. All right. Yeah, it looks like we have a hand. Spencer, do you want to go?
Yeah, thanks so much. My question is, a few of you have mentioned working at some pretty big firms. I know, Pat, you mentioned working at Booz Allen. I'm curious, do you guys have any recommendations for how you not get lost in a big firm like that?
Yeah, that's a tough one. And I got to Booz through a Duke connection on LinkedIn randomly. I would say those are kind of tough. And I was there for a year, and quite frankly, and it's for some people, it wasn't for me. I felt like I kind of did get lost in the sauce, and that it really depends on the contract you're on and the client that you have and all of that. So all that being said, to be successful, I think you just there are networking opportunities certainly at the company. So like you can go to those, as we said, mentors, like there are mentors at Booz Allen, both organically in your own chain, but then also you can, hit up people on LinkedIn. So I think all that stuff still applies. You can definitely make it work. You can definitely be successful in it. I think my key advice though would be do your job effectively. Like whatever you are asked to do at the ground level, don't worry about all the other stuff and where you want to be in 5 years and all that. Have that in the back of your mind, but like do the job that you're asked to do well, and then your immediate supervisors will take notice of that, and you'll get promoted and pay raises and all that. But I think the career risers and the people who are clearly like just trying to get to the next thing, it doesn't look good.
Yeah, so ECS isn't as big, but from my perspective and the perspective of I have a few friends at Booz, I can second just do your job. Honestly, be a performer, get close with your team. If you're working on a government contract, get close to the government. So I go on runs with my USDI counterpart now in the morning before work, and we talk about work, but also about other things. And he's leaving to Andrew, but he will always, he's told me already, he's like, yeah, tell me what you want in the future and I'll see who I can connect you to. And so it's just do what you do best and make connections with the people around you, and that's all you can really do. And it'll help you in the long run.
Yeah, I really appreciate the two of you going into detail. It looks like we have another hand from Jimmy.
Yeah, so this is definitely a super vague question, but I have heard a lot of conflicting advice about the merits of becoming an expert or really good at one thing and then kind of branching out from there on your career versus trying to acquire a diverse set of skills that can kind of allow you to be open to multiple opportunities and career options and things like that. And obviously, I feel like it varies a lot by the particular industry or types of jobs you're interested in. But I was just wondering if one or the other of those strategies is something that you've practiced in any of your careers, or you've seen other people be successful with one or the other, or if you have any thoughts about how to balance kind of those two approaches to like a career path.
I can start. I think I'm still figuring out the answer to this question. It's an excellent question. I don't think it matters so much at the beginning of your career. Only though, thinking only as a government employee in the civil service, at some point you're going to have to decide you want to be a GS 15 forever as a subject matter expert manager of a portfolio of some kind, or go the SCS route, which is more of the strategic management, managing a directorate of some kind. I'm grossly generalizing, but at some point in your career, you, at least in the government, that's what I'm speaking about, you will have to make a choice. But at the beginning, I actually think marketing myself as indispensable with certain skills, whether that's project management, writing, those are really the two I'm focusing on. Essential in your current role, indispensable to your team, but then can be applied to any topic. As a more generalist thinking skills wise, that I think is most helpful for people at the beginning of the career. This is just my opinion. I do think though, being very vocal about the single issues that you're very passionate about, that you're interested in, that you do have a unique background of to some degree of expertise, is also important. So in my office, I'm functionally a generalist, and I do a ton of different things, but I said to my boss, I've written 2 theses now at the intersection of gender and security. and we're doing a lot of diversity and inclusion stuff. I mean, anything related to gender equity or women in combat arms or whatever, it's a huge issue set. Can you think of me when you're staffing those issues, even if they're outside of our portfolio? I also said the same thing about China. I lived in China for a year. I want to leverage that. If you see any issues come up as China permeates everything, can you think of me? So I established myself as a generalist, mostly rooted in skills, but was very vocal in the two issues I care about. And now I'm leading the Army's response to pregnancy and postpartum policy, so it's like you be vocal about what you want to leverage your subject matter expertise in, but then also making it clear that you can do anything, as you're intelligent, you're a good writer, you're a good team player. And I think for the first 5 or 10 years of one's career, that should be okay, but at some point you're going to have to, I think, make a choice. Are you going to be a strategic thinker, advisor, senior advisor, or a portfolio manager, project manager of a very specific policy area? So I'm only speaking for the government, though. So I'll shut up and let someone else contribute as well.
Yeah, from the private sector side, I second what Amy. So in a very similar way, I think you can really differentiate, because there are soft skills like the writing, talking, networking that will be useful no matter what you do. Those are skills you should always be working on. But in terms of looking at the private sector specifically, the question between generalist and expert is you have to be very careful on looking at where your industry is trending. So let's say you were a Russia expert, right? Still a thriving market, but China's becoming bigger now. And so if you completely put all your eggs in the Russia basket, well, maybe now's the time to start, learning a little bit about China and moving that. Or if you're doing a lot of like traditional defense roles, or traditional, if you're like looking at coin or terrorism, those may be traditionally dying away to more domestic terrorism, or looking more at near peer competitors. And there's also new industries that there's very little experts in, like space-based industries, satellite, AI, cyber, that if you become an expert now, or you try to, that will probably pay off in the future because it's trending that way. And so for private sector, I'd be, it's not, unfortunately, the answer is it depends, because it depends on whether what you want to be an expert in is something that is a long-term viable path to go down.
It looks like we have another hand from Emma. Go ahead.
Thanks, Carter. First off, just thank you all for taking the time to speak with us today. We really, really appreciate it. I know Iza and Amy, you mentioned the transition from positions you didn't love into a job that you really enjoy now. How did you know you wanted to exit, and how did you do so while maintaining a relationship, with your former colleagues?
Well, I can start. I was in a profoundly toxic environment. It's not even on my LinkedIn anymore, so none of you will ever know. And it's I knew after 2 weeks that the job that was offered to me was not what manifested in reality, and I gave it a chance. But then after a month, nothing changed. My bosses weren't looking out for my interests or my development. It was just not a great environment. And so you will start to recognize in yourself that you are not as articulate, you aren't as efficient. The normal tasks that you used to do very quickly in college start to just take a lot out of you. And then you finish work and you just like scroll through Facebook or watch movies. I never watched TV before this toxic job, and that's all I found myself doing. I'm like, okay, I have to assess. This is creating a physical change in me. Your brain is a muscle. I'm not using it. Muscles atrophy if they're not being used. And I just knew that I needed to be challenged in different ways. And so I immediately just started having coffee chats, and I reached out to a career coach and I asked for help in 2 sentences, how to spin this experience that I was looking to leave after just a few months into something that articulated what I liked and what skills I learned and what I was hoping to gain in a different position. And it was just a 2-sentence explanation that waved away any concern about why someone was leaving a job within a year, and articulated what I wanted more of in a new opportunity. And once I had help crafting that little elevator pitch, no one ever asked me a follow-up for why I left the job after I think it ended up being 8 months, but I interviewed for my current job after 6. Or after 4. So that's like kind of a strategic thing, but just seeing changes in yourself. And I think the one thing that isn't mentioned that is important is finances. Some people will be starting their career with different, degrees of privilege, but the financial decisions that you make in your early 20s will have exponential effects for the rest of your life. And so not going into debt, not having some savings, in making some initial investments, starting a retirement IRA. These are decisions that are very important to consider. And so I did a spreadsheet. So what's my biggest expense? Rent. Okay, when does my lease end? What is my worst case scenario? I can move back home. How does that change my job opportunities? And I set a date on the calendar. Luckily, I found a job before that end date, but I would have quit for nothing because I had the benefit of moving back to my mom's house, and I was prepared to do that. And so knowing your financial situation, knowing that that will have effects for the rest of your life, and you don't want to go into debt. But sometimes your mental health and your ability to apply your brain to different situations is more important. Everyone I know who took that leap of faith, and it really requires a lot of confidence to like quit for nothing, found a job immediately just because they were themselves again. They didn't even realize how upset they were until they left. And so again, I don't want to tell everyone to do that, because I recognize some people just need health insurance, and that changes your situation. But if you have the means, just recognize changes in yourself and be confident to make decisions that you don't deserve to stay in a toxic environment. Not every job will be a dream job. You will learn through everything, but toxic is a different level. And be confident to leave something after 6 months if it's just not a good fit. Figure out how to articulate that experience and then move on. No one questioned me, so I don't think anyone would question you. Well, I can talk forever on this, but I'll let Iza go.
So I had actually, I think, the opposite experience in every way. And so I stayed too long. I stayed for 2.5 years. And part of it was, I actually really liked my team. I loved my boss and I loved my team. And we would, make office meme jokes all the time. And so it took a while for me to realize that not only did I hate my job, but like Amy said, it was, I wasn't eating well. I was being very snappish outside of my real life. And so there's a ton of that to be said. And I actually talked to my boss like a few months afterwards when I switched companies. And when he heard some of what I was experiencing, he's like, you should have left a long time ago. And part of the reason I didn't was because I was scared, because I was in grad school and I was like, wow, this job lets me leave a little bit early so I can make it to class before virtual times. They're offering me, they were paying for some of my grad school. And so it was, there were a lot of pros, like my boss was very understanding for when I would work from home whenever I had an exam coming up. And so it was kind of like a leap of faith to move, but it was the moment I realized I needed to leave was when I was like, all right, I'll take a job for 20 grand. That'll send me to Afghanistan. Let's go. It's like, you never want to be on your little desperate little rungs. And so your question was, how do you leave a place and you're not ruin things? First, in your interview process, never badmouth your company. They will not take kindly to it. Not the company you're leaving, but the company you're going to, because then they'll know that you're not that kind of person. So never badmouth your company. Like Amy said, make a story for like a real story why you're leaving and stick to it. If you can spin it, so the way I spun it, I didn't say I hated that Pepsi company was yelling at me all the time. I said, I wanted to move into defense work more. I'm happy to use the skills I learned here. And I feel like I've used up a lot of my opportunities for learning. I was a little bit different because I was there for 2.5 years. So it's like, I could say, oh, it's my time to leave. I have all these skills. Didn't feel like I was growing anymore, and move. And the second thing, I don't know, Amy, what your boss is like. So my boss was actually very encouraging. And so he, learning who you can trust, who you can rely on, really helped me in that when I told him I was leaving, like, I don't care what job I got, he's like, all right, calm down, let's work together, let's get you a job you actually want, as opposed to just jumping ship, and then, I'll help you leave. Don't know if that answers your question, but that's how I did it.
Helping with the transition, I think, is the last memory they'll have of you. And so doing your best to train whoever follows you, or to just don't blow up the bridge, like just help with your transition. And that's what they'll remember, because many of you who go into defense, like if you're getting a security clearance, like they will interview your previous employers. And so leaving on positive notes, like they don't need to know how depressed you were and how upset you were and how unfulfilled you were. You learn things, as bad as the experience was. And so in my situation, it was my boss, it wasn't my coworkers. I love them. But helping the transition, I think, is like the easiest thing to do.
I can speak on this real quick as well. I left a job once, loved my boss, loved my coworkers, loved everything about it. They just ultimately weren't offering me as much as I wanted to stay on. And something that helped for me is, they did love the work that I was doing, and then they loved having me be a part of the team. It's just that it wasn't, quite in their budget. But in order to kind of grease that relationship and maintain it, what I was able to do was they actually searched for an opportunity for me with a client of theirs, because they wanted to kind of like continue to have that relationship with me. And they said, like, if we send her to this client, like the client's going to be happy. And then when I was having that conversation, kind of going to what Isa was saying about not bad mouthing your previous employer, I'm having the interview with the person there, and he's saying, like, so like, why are you leaving? And so I obviously didn't mention any of this. And what I said is, this new firm, it gives me the opportunity to do what I was doing, but at a much higher level of responsibility. The work is just a little bit broader than what's on offer at the previous firm. And yeah, just kind of have a story, working for a client or someone that they like is sometimes an option, especially when you're looking at places like, a Booz Allen or consulting firms or law firms. They love to have employees that they like and they value to go work for someone on the other side. So think about that as well.
All right, this has been great, but I know it's a Friday afternoon, people need to run, so sadly I'm gonna have to cut it off. I really want to thank all of our panelists. Thank you so much for having a discussion with me, and then being willing to stick around for a few minutes to answer some questions from the audience. I know even with this timing, this has been great personally for me, and I think for everybody else. So I really appreciate you taking the time. I know Beth sent, for the audience members here, Beth sent in the chat a few minutes ago, information about the AGS newsletter and upcoming events. We have some really interesting upcoming events before the end of the semester and even before the end of the month. So go ahead and get on our newsletter, take a look at those. And once again, thank you to all of our panelists. Thank you to the audience. And yeah, enjoy your Friday evenings.
Thank you.